Hi, my name is Guy Trainin, and we're here with Rob Coplan from Carleton University in Canada. And we're here to talk about shyness and what teachers think about it when their students are shy and what we might be able to do about it as teachers and especially in teacher education. So why don't you start us and talk about what are shy kids and why are we even concerned about shy kids?
Sure. So shyness is a temperamental trait. So that means it appears relatively early on in life, and it's quite stable, actually one of the most stable temperamental characteristics across the lifespan. And we see a temperament as sort of a building block for personality. So when shy children are young, it typically emerges as a wariness or a nervousness or anxiety in the face of meeting new people, in the face of novel social situations. When shy kids get a little bit older, it also comes to encompass feelings of embarrassment and self-consciousness when you feel like you are the center of attention, like if there's a camera in your face and you're having to talk off the cuff about your research. So those are sort of the characteristics that would define shy kids. And of course, when shy kids hit the school system, they face a lot of unique challenges. Particularly,
So they're facing unique challenges in learning or socially or both?
Yeah, I would say it would be a combination. Certainly on the social front, the school environment is stressful for shy kids because there's a lot of other kids there. And you know, even at the start of the school year when they're meeting new kids, that will cause some stress for them. But just being in the school environment, you know, they may be more concerned about what other children are thinking about them or the kinds of social experiences they are having or missing out on, and they may not be focusing on the classroom environment. So in some ways we could be concerned about shy kids because they are maybe not concentrating in class because they're too worried that the teacher is going to call on them and ask them to say something in front of everyone, or they could be worried about the social experiences, who they're going to play with at recess or at lunchtime, and ruminating about these kinds of issues instead of concentrating on the class.
Yeah, and when you think about school, especially in the early grades, where a lot of our students, so in teacher education, there are going to be elementary teachers, there's a tremendous focus on public performance. You know, reading as a performance. Later in life, in high school, you're actually expected to read quietly, but in elementary school, you're expected to read in front of everybody out loud. So that can be a complicated factor.
For sure. Verbal participation is a key component of the curriculum at all ages. And you mentioned for young kids, there's this focus on, I mean, even show and tell. Whoever invented show and tell was not thinking about shy kids, right? Stand up in front of all these other kids and talk off the cuff about something that happened to you. It's, you know, that's the shy child's worst nightmare, to be placed in that kind of situation. And as kids get a little bit older, there's also this increased focus on group work and working with other kids to perform social and academic goals. And just being in that kind of group setting can really be stressful and off-putting for shy kids. And it kind of puts them with this extra challenge because not only do they have to focus on the academic component, but they're dealing with all these social stressors at the same time.
Yeah, and it's really hard to process all of that at once and perform. So what are some of the outcomes for shy kids? And you're probably going to say this, but I'm going to say this as well. It is important to remember that it doesn't happen to all shy kids.
Of course.
And that there's nothing wrong with being shy. It's just that we as teachers need to be aware that we need a set of strategies to help them cope so they can be successful.
Right.
And not just leave that to chance, because a lot of shy kids do become successful. That's not a...
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and that's certainly something I stress with parents and with teachers when I talk to them, is that shyness is a personality trait. It's a temperamental characteristic, and it has survived evolution because it has some adaptive quality to it. And it's a good thing for our species that not everybody is the most exuberant, bouncing off the wall kind of person. It's nice to have some people who will look before they leap. It's nice to have some people who are sensitive to threats in the environment, and that's a good thing. And again, the message for parents and teachers around this is that we're not trying to change shyness, we're not trying to pathologize it, we're not trying to alter people's personality, but we just want to make sure that shy children have the kinds of coping strategies that they need, that shyness doesn't interfere with them accomplishing the important stuff that they need to do. And at school, that means being able to focus on the teacher and listen, being able to talk to your friend, being able to engage in social activities. Because we can worry about shy kids sometimes because if they are off by themselves all the time and they're not engaging socially, they're missing out on all the good stuff that we get from hanging out with our friends. They're missing out on learning and practicing social skills and on social cognitive ideas, learning to understand people think differently than they do, all of the support and intimacy that we get from our friends, all this good stuff. If shy kids are off by themselves, then they perhaps will come to fall behind on the acquisition of these important skills. And they do face these challenges in the school environment that may make us be a little bit concerned about them. So they tend to be more prone to negative peer experiences. They tend to be more likely to be rejected and excluded by children, victimized. They have difficulties forming friendships. And regardless of the reason why they are excluded or rejected, children who are excluded and rejected go on to have more significant risk for other kinds of problems. So that's a sort of another reason to be potentially concerned. And shyness in and of itself, extreme shyness in early childhood is a significant predictor of more significant mental health difficulties in adolescence and adulthood, including social anxiety disorder, depression, and other kinds of more significant internalizing kinds of problems. So those are kind of the reasons why we might be, worried about shy kids. Having said that, just to echo your point, most shy kids, of course, are going to turn out just fine.
And so the next step, which you've done in your research, which I found extremely fascinating, is what do teachers think about shy kids in their classroom? Because there is that, as teachers, we attend to the ones who are more vocal. There's quite a bit of literature about that. In special education, we tend to notice the kids who are not doing well, who are disruptive first, and the ones with more internalizing behaviors a little bit later. So talk a little bit about what you find.
Sure. Well, I mean, historically, there's been this idea that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, right? So the child who is beating someone up or who's bouncing off the walls in a situation of limited resources, the teacher only has so much attention and time to go around in a class of 30-something children, of course, is going to be paying attention to the child who has a victim hurting someone else or is disrupting the entire class so that nobody can learn. So it's quite understandable why these types of more externalizing behaviors have certainly received a lot more attention. And historically, of course, it's been much more the case that shy kids have tended to be ignored. They sit quietly, they're not overtly bothering anybody. If you don't look really closely, you might even not be able to tell that they're unhappy on the inside, right? Because it's an internal state, it's more difficult for the teachers to infer. So that's a challenge going in. And shy children behave in such a way that is not necessarily endearing them to teachers in terms of their academic performance. So even if the shy child knows the answer to a question when called upon and asked to speak to the entire class, the answer might fly out of their head because they're nervous, or they just might refuse to say it because they don't want to be the center of attention. And for a teacher, that means they could potentially infer that that child is not very smart or hasn't done their homework because they haven't answered the question, and they'll quickly move on to another child who will give them the answer, and they'll form that attitude and belief that that child is not a good student in their class. And of course, that can have more negative implications down the line.
So that leads me to my final question, and that is, what do you think we can do in teacher education to help young teachers unpack that behavior and be able to help shy students understand them a little bit and help integrate them in productive ways?
Well, I mean, I think the first part of that question is about raising awareness among teachers to be mindful of this kind of child in their class. And I think we've made some very important strides over the last 25 years to raise that kind of awareness. There's certainly some evidence from our studies to show that teachers seem to be a lot more paying attention to shy kids and concerned about that kind of behavior. And I guess the next step after that is trying to develop some real best practices for dealing with shy children, particularly among transitions as they move from new class to new class into a new grade. Around testing conditions, there's some interesting research to show that different types of testing conditions are more stressful or less stressful for shy kids. They tend to do better in a group when they're not necessarily being queried individually, and they can fill out their test in a little bit more of an anonymous environment, so that may help their test performance. Also making teachers understand that although they can't completely alter their curriculum, they could at least try to take into account these sorts of performance issues for shy kids, and maybe not have 100% of the assignment being an oral presentation, offer some alternatives for the shy child to present maybe just to them or to a smaller group or something along those lines. And there's some interesting techniques that people have been working on to increase verbal participation among students in class. It was a really neat study done in show and tell where teachers were trained just to give children a little bit more time to not follow up an unanswered question with another question and another question, give a little bit more space, offer a little bit more of their own personal experiences. These types of very simple changes to their behaviors elicited quite a bit of increased verbal participation by shy kids. So I think there's a number of kind of little things that teachers could do or could learn to do that would help shy children in the school environment.
And I think that there's a combination there, as you pointed out. Partially it is awareness. This is something that they are. We're not going to change that. It's not going to be any different, but there are some strategies that can help them function very well in the classrooms and have more positive outcomes in general, both academic and social emotional.
Yes, I think that's exactly the kind of approach that we're suggesting.
And so we're looking forward to doing some of this work in our program as we're starting to think about social and emotional wellness of kids across the grades. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.